I think it's best to just start off with the issue of the Supreme Court's judgment, because I've seen your takes on it, and I'd like to get like a base to this conversation, what your thoughts are with regards to the Supreme Court's judgment that affirmed the victory of President Bola Tinubu.
Well, I have made it, publicly clear that I do not agree with the judgment. The basis of my disagreement with the judgment is in the judgment itself. It's in the fact that, this judgment does not in any way address the critical issues that are very evident to those who have genuinely followed the case and all the issues emanating from the appellant's, basic call on the courts. And the key thing for me is that there's a whole cloud of doubt about everything that the winner and the winning of the election represent. And that is not in any way something that gives us a basis for conferring legitimacy on that which the court, which a justice who's just retired, in fact, has helped to validate that our courts are now corrupted in many ways, and that cloud of a corrupted judicial system is hanging over the judgment by the Supreme Court. Go back and read the Justice Datijo's speech at his valedictory. He even quoted his colleague Adefope that left the judiciary earlier in May this year. I mean, I read the entire thing. Anyone reading that should worry about the judiciary. As a matter of fact, I mean, I started worrying about the judiciary when Olisa Bakoba made some statement about the judiciary. It was either earlier this year or last year. He talked about the judiciary extensively. And as one who's known Olisa from the days of, a common fight against militarization in this society, I didn't take his word lightly at all. In fact, I recall after listening to him, I think it was on your TV channel, it was an interview. After listening to him, I said to my husband, our situation is deeper than we think. You know what I mean? So we do know that from my days in Transparency International, that corruption is cancerous. When corruption becomes endemic, when it becomes systemic in a society, it has a way of afflicting all institutional processes, all structures, all decisions in ways that the cancerous cells attack the human body. It's a similar kind of thing. So it doesn't spare anything in its way. It's very clear now that we took it for granted that we could just carry on as this corruption thing spread in our society. And now it's taken it to the point where hardly anything is standing. Look at INEC. INEC is lost everything in the last elections. It's an organization that shockingly just decided to pick defeat from the jaws of victory, because it was getting to the place where citizens, especially the younger generation of citizens, were thinking, oh, we have an institution we can trust. It's made all of these promises. We're going to, really see democracy in action. And then it just goes 180 degrees away from everything. And so the electoral process just really got messed up severely. And then through the court processes, we see a repeat of institutions not acting credibly. A lot of the people who are the legal luminaries, when they've made their opinions on the whole judicial process, they have often just, really attacked things that have been adjudicated on the basis of technicalities, where the substance of the matter no longer really gets to be the basis of outcomes of the judicial process. And now, considering that we are no longer allowing the citizens to be the ones determining electoral outcomes, that it is the courts determining that, and juxtapose that with the joyfulness with which incumbent parties normally would say to the other parties, if you don't like the outcome, go to court. I mean, it tells you that something has gone wrong.
You've said quite a lot with regard to the judgment and linking that to the performance of the Independent National Electoral Commission, which has been questioned since the process. But I'd like us to sit with it, because I saw an article that questioned your position on this judgment. And for some, or perhaps the person who wrote that article, he was questioning what facts you were presented to question the judgment of the Supreme Court. And you've also just said that that judgment was supposed to address critical issues. What are those critical issues that should have been addressed in this judgment?
Well, did you see any thing that the Supreme Court said about the matter of drug-related offenses that were placed before it? There was no such thing. Things like that go to the heart of the character of the person who will lead a country. It's a big reputational risk for our country. When they talked about the matter of the president's certificate forgery, did you see that the substance of the matter was addressed? No, it was technical issue that on the basis of that they basically dismissed what the appellants were saying. So anyone who sort of says that they can argue in favor of the judgment of the Supreme Court, they are entitled to their opinion, but they should please pass me on, not having sufficient basis on which to say I do not agree with that judgment.
I've had a few conversations with lawyers on this matter as well. They say one thing, that there's a clear difference between what the law says and what it should be, and then there are concerns as to morality and technicality, as you put it. One lawyer says to me that the president may be liable on cases of forgery and the drug-related issue, but he enjoys immunity right now. So the Supreme Court focused on issues that the appeal court had dealt with because of that. Does that make sense to you?
Well, you and I cannot say that, we cannot say that anybody's position is, what would I say, is universally accurate in this matter, because as you can see, all you need to do would be to bring different lawyers into a room and they'll have their different positions. But for those of us who are, electorates and who have reasonable education and can follow the arguments on the basis of the facts that have been presented on matters, we can look at the arguments, and say, okay, why is this not quite making sense? Because if you, on technical grounds, are dismissing very potent issues that have been presented by the other side, you have every reason to face questioning and scrutiny by your citizens. The Supreme Court was not as a matter of fact, the courts were not easily doubted in our country for many decades. I mean, there was a time when if the justices of the Supreme Court, the Kayode Shores, the Justice Oputas, you know, the Adefara Saints, when they passed judgment, nobody said a word. I mean, like nobody said a word. And then political rascality entered into our society, and politicians began to buy up lawyers who corrupted the courts. It's a justice of the Supreme Court, leaving the Supreme Court, that said this. I read it, just like any other person. So I'm not the citizen without knowledge, because, I mean, I cannot pride myself of having those kinds of knowledge. But if someone who is a justice of the Supreme Court says that these are the issues clouding the reputation of the judiciary, and that the judiciary is now living with scorn by citizens, questioning its credibility, then it shouldn't be me you worry about. You should be worried about that institution. And all of us as citizens should be worried, because frankly speaking, everything about our existence as a country is anchored on the principles of the rule of law, and who is which of the three arms of government really own the duty of guaranteeing this. It is the judiciary. The judiciary was often called the hope, the last hope
of a common man.
of the common man. Well, I don't even think that.
But is this a hopeless situation? because you know, while some argue that it could be corruption, there are those who argue that it could be executive intimidation. So is it a completely hopeless situation?
Well, you know, I mean, whichever one it may be, what you still end up with is that the independence and the integrity of the judiciary is compromised. I mean, you know, look at what happened with our elections. Why is this gentleman, what's his name?
The champ?
No, Akpabio, sitting in the Senate? Why? This was a person who the judiciary basically handed an unconstitutional right to be elected a senator, considering that he was jostling for two, positions at the same time. What's that? It negated the rules of the game. The judiciary handed it over to him. Now, he won as a senator and is sitting as Senate president on lawlessness. How about the former president of the Senate? It was a similar thing. How do you run a society recklessly like this? How do you say you're a democracy and you don't respect democratic ethos? It's not a way that supports a progressive mindset for society. And so it is very clear that the political class of our country want to ruin this country. There's no, you can't argue otherwise on the basis of the evidence of rascality that we have seen. You mow down institutions like INEC by just turning it into a theater of politicians, compromising its independence, and then just literally taking the opposite of what its rules say. I think that the greatest danger, the greatest peril that our democracy faces does not come from any other any other quarters.
But the judiciary.
But the political class. The political class are endangering our democracy.
You know,
and what they've done is that they've pulled in the judiciary into it. In the past, we could reasonably expect the judiciary to be independent. But now, it lost out. I mean, once your society begins to doubt you, why did we not have this level of doubt of our judiciary in time past, Terry?
that was why I asked initially if it was a hopeless situation, because who has the power, or on whose shoulder does it lie to reform the judiciary? The political class.
Well, you know, that's what they call being in a prisoner's dilemma that we find ourselves. And, you know, when a situation like this, that is, frankly, very dangerous, exists, ultimately, there has to be some mechanism that brings everyone back to the table. And I think that we really are at a place in our whole political experiment where that conversation on what do we really want to be. You know what I mean? Like, even right now, the country is facing multiple levels of crisis, you know, because the political wind is still blowing, and it's not a good kind of wind. You know, the lack of political legitimacy, the kind of legitimacy that is conferred by both those who voted for you and those who didn't vote for you, is lacking. It's lacking. There is, you know, there is a big deficit in the way that we should be politically, the kind of cohesion. People have lost election in this country before, and people just said, it's a lost election. That's okay, we just move on. But not this kind of a situation. This is a very different one, Terry. You know, and then it's happening at a time when we don't have the kind of economic strength and resilience that we previously had at a relative level, you know? And so you look around you, our social capital is vastly eroded, you know? So on what anchors are we now standing? So it does mean that at a certain level, we will be forced as a society to really look at ourselves and say, how do we take the lessons of this season to design a pathway?